When my son first brought Lucas to our house, he seemed like an ordinary boy with a shy smile and a curious look in his eyes. He was a polite young man, always helpful and ready to help. Pedro, my son, spoke highly of Lucas, saying he was a loyal and trustworthy friend. At first, I saw him as just my son's friend, a pleasant presence who brought joy and energy to our home. Everything started to change when Pedro needed to travel for work for a few weeks. As always, Lucas continued to visit our house, saying that he enjoyed our company and that he felt at home there. I also appreciated his presence as he brought some light and distraction to my lonely routine. He was always very polite and respectful, helping with the housework and always ready for a good conversation. However, I slowly realized that something else was happening. Lucas started to look at me in a different way. His gaze, once innocent, was now full of intensity and curiosity. He was always around, finding excuses to spend more time with me. I, in turn, couldn't help but feel something strange awaken within me. It was a mixture of anxiety and excitement that I hadn't felt in a long time. There was one afternoon in particular that stands out in my memory. We were in the kitchen preparing dinner. Lucas was chopping vegetables while I stirred a pan on the stove. The atmosphere was peaceful, with soft music playing in the background. Every now and then, our eyes met, and I felt an electric current run through my body. As we worked together, our hands touched as we reached for the same seasoning. It was a brief touch, but I felt an electric current pass through my body. I looked at him and saw that his eyes were shining in a way I had never noticed before. It was an intense glow, full of desire and curiosity. From that moment on, our eyes met more frequently, and I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to feel his arms around me. The tension between us grew every day. Every accidental touch, every smile, every conversation seemed loaded with meaning. I knew we were approaching the point of no return, but I couldn't move away. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, and Lucas's presence was like a flame I couldn't put out. The weeks passed, and the closeness between Lucas and I only grew. I longed for visits from him, feeling my heart race whenever he was near. The line between right and wrong began to blur, and I knew I was about to cross a line that could change everything. But at that moment, the need to be close to him, to feel his presence, was stronger than any guilt or fear. Then one quiet night, while we were watching a movie in the living room, Lucas came closer to me on the couch. I felt the warmth of his body next to mine, and my heart started to beat faster. He looked me in the eyes, and I saw a mixture of nervousness and determination. "I need to tell you something," he whispered, his voice low and husky. My heart almost stopped. "What's wrong, Lucas?" I asked, trying to remain calm. He took a deep breath, looking at the floor before looking back at me. I think I'm in love with you," he finally said, his words coming out quick and eager. I was speechless, a mixture of shock and relief washing over me. I knew I had feelings for him, but hearing those words was different. It was like a barrier had been broken, and everything we had been trying to hide came to the surface. "Lucas," I started, but he held my hand, his eyes begging for understanding. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know you're my best friend's mom, but I can't help it. I think about you all the time." There was so much sincerity in his voice, so much desire in his eyes that I couldn't resist. "I have feelings for you too, Lucas," I admitted, my voice shaking. "But this is so wrong." He shook my hand, his expression determined. "I know, but I can't control how I feel, and I think you feel the same way." His eyes were full of hope and fear, and I knew we were on the brink of something big. It was at that moment that everything changed. Our feelings, which had been hidden, were finally revealed, and we knew there was no going back. We were about to embark on a journey full of challenges and emotions, but at that moment, all that mattered was that we were together, ready to face whatever lay ahead. One day, as we were preparing dinner together, our hands touched as we reached for the same spice. It was a brief, almost insignificant touch, but I felt an electric current pass through my body. It was as if all my senses had been awakened at once. I looked at Lucas and saw that his eyes were shining in a way I had never noticed before. It was an intense glow, full of something I couldn't immediately define. From that moment on, our eyes met more frequently, and each meeting was filled with palpable tension. I felt my heart race every time our eyes met, and a mix of fear and excitement washed over me. I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to feel his arms around me, the warmth of his body next to mine. These fantasies became more frequent and more intense with each passing day. There was a specific afternoon that stood out in my memory. We were in the kitchen again, preparing something simple for dinner. Lucas was chopping vegetables while I stirred a pan on the stove. The kitchen was filled with soft music playing on the radio, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Every now and then, I would glance sideways at Lucas, admiring his concentration and the delicate way he handled the knife. Suddenly, he walked over to pick up a plate that was next to me. In this movement, our bodies touched lightly, and I felt a wave of heat rise through my body. I looked at him and saw a discreet smile form on his lips. He knew exactly what he was doing, and so did I. That smile was like an invitation, a silent provocation. The nights started to get longer. After dinner, we would often sit in the living room talking about everything and nothing at the same time. Lucas had a way of speaking that mesmerized me. He was smart, funny, and caring. Every story he told made me laugh, and every time he laughed, I felt my heart beat faster. The tension between us was growing, and I knew we were approaching the point of no return. One day, while we were sitting on the couch, Lucas came closer. I felt his leg brush against mine, and a shiver ran down my spine. He started talking about a book he was reading, but I could barely pay attention to his words. All I could think about was how much I wanted to feel his lips on mine. Then, without warning, he placed his hand over mine. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. I looked at him, and our eyes met once again. There was a mixture of desire and hesitation in his eyes, and I knew he was reflecting the same thing. Every moment we spent together was filled with tension that only increased. Every touch, every look was a promise of something more. I knew we were about to cross a line, and the desire to feel more of Lucas was becoming irresistible. Every day that passed, the line between right and wrong became thinner, and I found myself more and more involved with him. So our relationship continued to develop, full of furtive glances and accidental touches. Each day, the tension between us grew, and I knew it was only a matter of time before we finally crossed the point of no return. Excitement and fear went hand in hand, and I felt trapped in a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't control. One night, after a nice quiet dinner, Lucas and I sat on the couch to watch a movie. The soft light in the room created a cozy atmosphere, and the sound of the movie filled the space around us. I was trying to concentrate on the screen, but Lucas's proximity made it nearly impossible. I felt the warmth of his body next to mine, and my heart beat faster with each passing minute. Suddenly, Lucas turned to me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that left me breathless. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice low and a little shaky. My heart stopped for a moment, and I felt a wave of anxiety mixed with anticipation. "What is it, Lucas?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath, looking at the floor for a moment before looking back at me. I think I'm in love with you," he said finally, his words coming out quickly and nervously. The world around me seemed to stop. I stayed silent, trying to process what he had just said. Part of me was shocked, but another part, the part I tried to ignore, was relieved to hear that. "Lucas," I started, but he interrupted me, holding my hand firmly. "I know this is complicated. I know you're my best friend's mom, but I can't help it. I think about you all the time. When I'm away, all I can think about is when I can see you again." His eyes were full of sincerity and emotion, and I felt a tear run down my face. "I have feelings for you too, Lucas," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But this is so wrong. Pedro, he would never understand." He squeezed my hand tighter, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know, but I can't control how I feel. And by the way you look at me, I know you feel the same." Our silence was filled with palpable tension. Lucas approached slowly, as if giving me time to back away if I wanted, but I didn't back down. Instead, I leaned into him, our faces so close I could feel his warm breath against my skin. Then, he kissed me. It was a soft kiss at first, exploratory, but soon it became more intense, full of repressed desire. I lost myself in that kiss, forgetting everything around us. The feeling of his lips against mine, the heat of his body pressed against mine, was all I could feel. When we finally broke apart, we were both panting, our hearts beating wildly. "This is crazy," I murmured, my forehead touching his, "but I can't stop thinking about you." He smiled, that smile that was shy and at the same time full of confidence. "Then don't stop. Let's live this, even if it's just for a moment." From that night on, our relationship changed completely. We were no longer just two friends or acquaintances. There was a deep and intense connection between us, a passion we could no longer ignore. Each encounter became more meaningful, each touch more emotionally charged. Thus began our secret, a forbidden but irresistible relationship. We lived each moment as if it were our last, enjoying the excitement and danger of our situation. And although we knew it couldn't last forever, we were willing to enjoy every second while we could. The days following our confession were a whirlwind of emotions. The tension between us intensified, and with every moment we spent together, the need to be closer grew. Lucas and I found excuses to be alone, looking for any opportunity to touch each other, kiss each other, wrap ourselves around each other. It was a dangerous but irresistible dance. One afternoon when the house was empty, the temptation became unbearable. Pedro was traveling for work, and I knew we would have a few hours without interruptions. Lucas arrived a little earlier than agreed, and I opened the door, feeling my heart beating uncontrollably. He walked in and without saying a word, pulled me into a tight hug. His warm body against mine made my heart race even faster. Our first kiss that afternoon was intense, full of accumulated desire. Lucas grabbed me by the waist and lifted me up, pressing me against the wall. I could feel his quick, ragged breaths against my neck as he whispered sweet, passionate words. Every touch, every caress made my body vibrate with desire. "I want you," he murmured, his eyes burning with passion. "I cannot wait anymore." I couldn't either. My hands explored his body, feeling every muscle, every curve. It was like I was discovering something new and exciting, and I couldn't stop. We went to my room, our bodies intertwined, moving with an urgency that was almost desperate. The bed felt like a refuge, a place where we could finally give ourselves completely to each other. Lucas laid me down gently, his eyes never leaving mine. There was an intensity in his gaze that made me shiver. He began to kiss me slowly, exploring every inch of my skin with his lips. I felt a wave of heat rise through my body, each touch of his making me more sensitive, more alive. It was as if all my senses were awake, ready to experience every nuance of that moment. We moved together, our bodies fitting together perfectly. There was a synchronicity, a connection that I had never felt before. It was more than just desire. It was a deep need to be with him, to feel every part of him. The room was filled with our heavy breathing, the sound of our bodies moving together, creating a symphony of passion. When we finally reached the summit, it was as if the world around us disappeared. I felt a wave of pleasure invade me, completely consuming me. Lucas held me tightly, his eyes closed in bliss, and I knew he was feeling the same. It was a moment of pure connection, of total surrender. Afterwards, we lay together, our bodies still intertwined, the feel of his skin against mine, the sound of his slow, even breathing. Everything was perfect. "I've never felt anything like this before," he said softly, stroking my hair. "You make me feel alive." I smiled, feeling a happiness I hadn't experienced in a long time. "I feel the same way too, Lucas. You brought something new into my life, something I didn't even know I needed." We stayed there, enjoying the intimacy, the warmth of our bodies, the connection we had created. We knew our relationship was complicated, but at that moment, nothing else mattered. We were together, and that was all we needed. From that day on, our relationship deepened even further. Each encounter was more intense, more passionate. Lucas and I became inseparable, enjoying every second together, even though we knew our secret couldn't last forever. But while it lasted, we were determined to live each moment to the fullest, enjoying the passion and intensity of our forbidden love. Like everything that is secret, our relationship couldn't stay hidden forever. Pedro returned home after one of his trips, and although we tried to be discreet, something in the dynamic between Lucas and I had changed, and Pedro began to notice. I knew he was smart enough to notice the tension in the air, but I never imagined he would find out so abruptly one night after a dinner where we were all sitting at the table. Pedro casually commented that he needed to leave to solve something at work. Lucas and I exchanged a quick look, aware that this would give us a little alone time. Little did we know that that would be the beginning of our end. With Pedro out of the house, Lucas and I wasted no time. We embraced in the living room, our bodies moving with familiarity and desire. Our kisses were urgent, and we quickly moved to my room, where we had spent so many intimate moments. We were so wrapped up in each other that we didn't hear the front door open. Pedro had forgotten something important and returned home. He quickly went upstairs, perhaps to get a document, or just to say that he would be back soon. When he opened the door to my room, the shock and pain on his face were unbearable. "Lucas? Mom?" The words came out as a whisper, filled with disbelief and betrayal. I pulled away from Lucas, my heart beating wildly. Pedro was standing in the doorway, looking at us with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Pedro, I can explain," I started, but he raised his hand, interrupting me. "There's no explanation for this, Mom. You and my best friend?" The pain in his voice was palpable, and I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. Lucas tried to speak, to give some justification, but Pedro didn't want to hear it. "Get out of my house, Lucas, now." Lucas hesitated, looking to me for guidance, but I knew there was nothing we could say or do to ease Pedro's pain in that moment. Lucas quickly got dressed and left, leaving me alone with my son. Pedro looked at me, his eyes full of tears. "How could you do this to me, to my best friend?" I had no answers, only tears running down my face. "I'm sorry, Pedro," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. It ... it just happened." But my words were insufficient, unable to repair the damage I had caused. Pedro left the room and went to his own, slamming the door hard. I stood there, alone and desolate, feeling the weight of guilt and regret. I knew our relationship would never be the same. Lucas and I had crossed a line, and the consequences were devastating. In the days that followed, Pedro barely spoke to me. He avoided being at home, and when he was, the silence was unbearable. I tried several times to talk to him, explain my feelings, but he didn't want to listen. The pain in his heart was deep, and I knew it would take a long time for him to begin to forgive me, if that was even possible. Lucas and I also ended our relationship. It was the inevitable end of something that, although intense and true, was also painfully wrong. He walked away, perhaps to try to rebuild his life away from the chaos we had created. I was left alone, trying to deal with the consequences of my choices. The house that was once full of laughter and joy was now plunged into silence and sadness. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, trying to repair the relationship with my son and, more importantly, trying to find a way to forgive myself. After the devastating discovery, my life collapsed. Pedro walked away from me, barely spoke to me, and the pain in his eyes was a constant reminder of my mistake. Lucas also disappeared from our lives, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. I knew I needed to do something to regain my son's trust, but I didn't know where to start. I decided that the first thing I needed to do was to give Pedro the space he needed. He avoided being at home, preferring to spend time with friends or at work. I respected that, but I also started to leave small signs that I was willing to fight for our relationship. She left notes in his room, saying how much she loved him and how sorry she was for everything. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. As time went by, Pedro began to spend more time at home. I continued to be patient, waiting for an opportunity to talk. Finally, one quiet night, he approached me. We were in the kitchen, and he sat at the table, looking at his hands. I knew this was the moment. "Pedro," I began, my voice soft. "I know I hurt you deeply, and there is no excuse for what I did, but I want you to know that I am willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. You are the most important part of my life, and I'm sorry I broke it." He looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "Mom, I don't know if I can forgive you. This hurt me more than you can imagine, but I also know that you are my mother, and I still love you." Those words were a balm for my heart. "I know it will be a long process, and I'm willing to wait. I want to prove that I'm still worthy of your love and trust." From that night onwards, we began to rebuild our relationship step by step. I started investing more time in activities that Pedro liked, showing that I was there for him. We had dinners together, watched movies, and talked about everything and nothing. They were simple moments, but full of meaning. Over the months, our bond began to grow stronger again. Pedro was still hurt, but little by little, he began to forgive me. I knew it would be a long process, but I was determined to do whatever it took. Trust is something that is rebuilt over time. and every small step we took was a victory. As for Lucas, we never had contact again. He moved to another city, looking to restart his life away from the chaos we caused. Although I still thought about him sometimes, I knew the chapter in our story had closed. It was a painful but necessary lesson. Over time, I learned to forgive myself. The journey of redemption was not easy, but each step helped me understand the importance of forgiveness, both from Pedro and from myself. I began to value my relationship with my son even more, knowing that he was the most important person in my life. Today, Pedro and I are closer than ever. What happened in the past taught us the importance of honesty and trust. We know that we will always have challenges, but we also know that we can overcome them together. I learned that, even in the darkest moments, there is always a chance for redemption and to build something new and strong. So my story is a constant reminder that even when we make mistakes, it is possible to find a way back, rebuild relationships, and above all, learn to truly love and forgive.